Many of you know that I lost one of my good friends several months ago. He was one of my classmates, and I loved him, and I miss him greatly, but he had a few things that he liked to do that annoyed the daylights out of me. And one of them was that anytime you'd ask him what he was hungry or thirsty for, he'd go, "I think I'm in the mood for this," or "I think I'd like to have this to drink," okay? And he'd do it all the time until I started teasing him about it unmercifully. You know how I am, okay? But he'd say, "I think I'm hungry for this," or "Let's eat here tonight because I'm in the mood for this kind of food," all right? Even though it annoyed the daylights out of me, I'd give anything to hear it again. But thankfully, I can hear it in my mind and in my memory. And of course, I'm thinking about him this morning as I tell this story. But Brian was not so different than so many of us, okay? That sometimes we don't know what it is we're hungry or thirsty for. And that goes with regular food, but I think that it's even twice as real when we start thinking about what we need to fill up the hungers on the inside, okay? Food and drink are, I think, relatively easy to figure out. But sometimes trying to navigate our hearts and our wills, that's sometimes what gives us a little bit of trouble. Sometimes in trying to figure out what we're hungry or thirsty for, we sometimes make all kinds of mistakes along the way because we think that something's going to fill us up or we think something is going to fulfill our hunger. And then what we find out is that we were wrong. And then we have to go back and do it over again. Is that not the nature of sin? Okay? We never sin because we think it's going to make us miserable. We sin because we get ourselves convinced that that's what's going to make us happy. And then we find out that it didn't make us happy and actually left us hungrier than we were before we did it. Okay? Is there anybody in here who that has not happened to yet? Don't raise your hand. All the rest of us will dislike you. Okay? We all make those kinds of mistakes. Every single one of us has reached for something at some point in time that we thought was going to fill us up and then left us empty. All right? Sometimes we are so confused by our spiritual lives that we don't even know what it is that we're hungry or thirsty for, or at least we can't seem to name it sometimes. All right? And don't take the easy way out and say, "Well, Jesus, of course." But we can't figure that out all the time, and we can't figure out sometimes what it is that Jesus is trying to lead us to. Because we're simple human beings and we make mistakes. Our ancestors in the faith were no different, and both our first reading in the gospel bear witness to that today. All right, so let's take a look first at the reading from Exodus, all right? And here is Moses with the Israelites in the desert. Now, he has just, with God's help, freed them from their slavery. They were miserable in their slavery, and they cried out to God and said, "Deliver us," and God did. But now they're in the desert, okay? And they're wandering around, and one of the realities is that as long as they were in Israel, even though they were miserable, they always had enough to eat, and they always had plenty to drink. Now they're in the desert. And while they're wandering through the desert, they're starting to get insecure. They're starting to feel like maybe this isn't working, or maybe even God saved them from our slavery, but should we have even asked to be freed from our slavery, because now we're out here in the desert, we're wandering, and all there is all this doubting and questioning on the horizon. And so they begin to question God, and they begin to doubt God, and they begin to take it out on Moses and say, "Did you bring us out here just to die in the desert?" Now, it's very easy from where you and I sit here thousands of years later to look at those Israelites and say, "Oh, you poor dumb things." Okay? It's very easy for us to pass judgment on our own, all right? But think about it for a moment. They left the only thing they knew, and now here they are wandering, and they're beginning to wonder whether or not they made the right choice. And they're beginning to wonder whether or not they're going to live through this experience. And so, of course, they're crying out to God, and of course they're taking it out on Moses, because they're fearful, and they don't know, and they're scared. God then says, "I'm going to show you something." And he takes Moses and he pulls Moses aside and he said, "I want you to take your staff and I want you to strike the rock, and there will be water from the rock." And so Moses does that, which is kind of God's way of saying, I've got this, okay? Now will you stop your whining and your wondering? I've got this. If I can bring water from the rock, I can take care of you. You think that did it for the Israelites? Not really. It did for a few minutes. But they still kept wandering through life. Now, what I'm going to say to you this morning, and just take this in the spirit in which it's offered, we are no different from our ancestors in the faith. Because you know as well as I do that for a while we're sailing along and doing great. And then all of a sudden, we take our eyes off God, and it doesn't take much. We take our eyes off God, and pretty soon we're beginning to wander, and we're beginning to doubt. And then we're going to ourselves, what was it I was hungry for again? What was it I was thirsting for? We're just like our ancestors in the faith. Now, let's shift to the gospel. Again, one of the best stories in the scriptures. It is so full of things that even if I preach for the next half hour, which I won't, because you would whine, but the story is full of so much, you can't really get to all of it. But there are some beautiful images in this story that I don't want us to miss. The first one is, and I'm not going to have time to talk about this much. One day, I almost preached on this, but this is not the main thread that I pulled, okay? Notice who's thirsty first. Notice who's thirsty first in the story. The woman is coming to draw the water that she needs for her home and everything. But who's the one that first asks for a drink? Jesus. God seems to also be thirsty. Okay? God seems to be thirsty for his interaction with her. God seems to be thirsty for his interaction with us. We don't happen to think about God wanting or needing anything, okay? Which in one theological sense, God really, I guess, doesn't. But I love in this story that God gets thirsty, and he gets thirsty again. And in effect, he's figuring out here, was it just physical water that he was thirsty for? Or was he thirsty for his interaction with the woman at the well? I'm going to suggest it was the second. All right? So here he comes, and the woman then comes in order to draw water. And Jesus messes with her, okay? Anybody in here ever have Jesus mess with you? Okay, he does it all the time. He messes with her. And he says, why don't you give me a drink? And she's kind of like, how can you, a Jewish man, be asking me, a Samaritan woman, for a drink? All right? Because Jesus wasn't supposed to be talking to her. First of all, he was a male, she was a female. He wasn't supposed to be talking to her because he wasn't related to her. Does he care? No. All right? He says, give me a drink. And then she says, and here you are doing this, and I'm a Samaritan, and you got to remember that whenever Jews said the word Samaritan, they went, puh. All right? She was a puh Samaritan. All right? Because they didn't have anything to do with each other. And here is Jesus breaking all the social taboos. She's there at noon, which is not the time you came to the well. You came in the morning or the evening because it was cooler. She's coming in the middle of the day. Why? Because she doesn't want to deal with anybody. And who does she get to deal with? Jesus messing with her right in the middle of the day. And they start this banter back and forth. And I kind of love it because that's kind of the way my prayer life. I love people. All of you that have some nice, gentle prayer relationships with God, good for you. My relationships are like this. He messes with me and I fight back. Okay? It's kind of like wrestling. All right? Rather than this nice, gentle, quiet thing. That's the way I have to pray. Okay? It takes a little bit for God to get my attention. All right? And so we get into the banter, and she gets into the banter. And here in the middle of it all, he basically says, you're not getting what I'm trying to say to you. I got something better for you than that regular water. I've got living water. And if you drink this living water, you'll never be thirsty again. And she's just kind of like, first of all, you don't have a bucket, and the well is deep. Where are you going to get this living water? And then she begins to realize he's talking about something more than just the water in the well. And then as she's talking to him, he's like, she realizes she's going in her heart and her soul, I think I might be thirsty for this living water. Give me some of that, and I won't need anything else. Give me some of that, and I won't need anything else. And as they continue their conversation, as things continue to unfold, all right, he continues to mess with her. He says this. Now, I'm going to say this. This is the part of the story where every good Catholic who tries to behave looks at this woman and passes judgment. I'm going to tell you that if you really want to get the most out of the story, you need to get over that. Okay? This is not a moment to be passing judgment. This is a moment to be identifying with her. All right? This is a moment to be identifying with her, not passing judgment on her. She was guilty of searching for love and looking for it in all the wrong places. Fine. But the bottom line is, she knew she was hungry, and she was trying to fill that emptiness inside of her. And Jesus just is able to help her get past all the mistakes and get to what he's really going to be able to fill. All right? Which one of us doesn't look like that in our worst moments? If you don't need to go to confession today at 3 o'clock in Kimberling City or next Sunday here at 3 o'clock here, good for you. But most of the rest of us sinners who've listened to it wrong from time to time probably need to go to confession. And there's the invitation. All right? There's the invitation. That we take the hand that the Lord is offering us to say, no matter how many times you've been confused, no matter how many times you've looked for it in the wrong place, no matter what it is, I'm going to be able to feed your hunger and I'm going to be able to slake your thirst, and you are going to be in a better place. That's what we're being invited to. That's what we're being invited to. And the Lord doesn't care how many times we made the mistake. He just wants us. He doesn't care how confused we can be from time to time. He just wants us. It doesn't matter to him how many times we fed and given ourselves something to drink that wasn't the right thing. He just wants us. Because when each one of us comes to the well, we bring our stuff. We bring our stuff to the well. And we are like that woman. We're bringing our stuff to the well, and it could be addiction, it could be loneliness, it could be depression, it could be never feeling loved, it could be the fact that we feel we've been abandoned or misunderstood or whatever it is. We bring our stuff to the well. And when we bring our stuff to the well, Jesus looks at us and says, I can give you living water. We need to figure out who it is that we really hunger and thirst for. We need to stop for a minute, and even if we do it in an annoying way, like, what am I hungry for? What am I thirsty for? Lord, you know better than I know myself. And because you know better than I know myself, give me, you, that living water to drink. And then at least for whatever time I'm able to do it, I will know again and again and again who it is that I'm really hungry and thirsty for. Let's ask our God to let us drink fully that we might know life.